of all, welcome to everyone joining us for another Mathematic program. It's very nice to see you all again. I'm Rachel Robinson, Vice President of Mathematic, and we really do appreciate you taking the next hour with us to really discuss what is an incredibly interesting topic. And I know something that's been top of mind for a lot of people, and really understanding, hey, what has happened to innovation in the last 18 months, right? What has happened to the way we do work and what happens moving forward. So first of all, I'm absolutely thrilled to be working with PA Consulting on this particular webinar. I can't say thank you enough to Mark and the team for pulling this together. And I'm sure Mark will tell you a little bit about the playbook that they put together at the beginning of the year. It's really what started and spurred this whole conversation and brought this panel together. So thank you to Tom, John, Steve, Mark, and we really do appreciate you taking the time to lead this group in like I said, a really interesting discussion. And with that, I will turn it over to Mark to drive things.
Thanks, Rachel. Thanks, everyone, for joining. Really excited to speak to everyone, especially my fellow panelists, and share our experience with innovation and the pre- and the post-pandemic world, and also talk about the role that innovation has played in supporting the industry's response to the pandemic, but also more importantly, what are some of those lessons learned? So first, let me introduce myself. I lead our MedTech capabilities at PA across both product design and development and operations. I have been in life sciences over the last couple of decades, specifically in MedTech. My focus has been on operational excellence across quality and regulatory, the R&D, supply chain, and the manufacturing functions. Some of the exciting trends that we've been working and supporting our clients with have been around some of the themes that some of them came across as a result of COVID, around remote care, digitization, sustainability. Obviously, cybersecurity is a pretty big and significant theme at this stage as well, and the ever-changing regulatory landscape. And so with that, I wanted to introduce our panelists as well, starting with Stephen, if you don't mind going first.
Sure, thank you, Mark. Be glad to. Hi, everyone. I'm Steve Mariano. I'm the Global VP of Endosurgical R&D for Fujifilm Medical Systems. I've been with Fujifilm now 6 years, most of my career in med tech device development. I'm very honored and excited to participate in this panel session. We have a very accomplished, I think, and diverse panel, so I think you'll get a lot of good perspective. And it's a topic that's very dear to me, and of course, Fujifilm, with our focus on value from innovation, we're very much interested in innovating, so we're very much interested in the topic and enjoy this conversation. So thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Stephen. John?
So hi, thrilled to be here as well. John Bloom, I'm the CEO of Photometrics. We're a virtual care management company focused on eliminating amputations among our most vulnerable patient populations, primarily those with diabetes with multiple comorbidities. And prior to that, I was an anesthesiologist, so it's kind of exciting to now find myself in completely in the business world, and again, thrilled to be a part of the panel. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us, John. Tom?
Thanks, Mark, and Rachel too. Thank you very much for inviting me here. I'm the CTO of Active Surgical. Joined as part of the founding team 4 years ago, but my med device and health tech career has gone for about the last 15 years or so. At Active, we're focused on delivering true intelligence and computer vision, machine learning into surgery in real time through the use of hardware agnostic platforms, both in vision and compute platforms. So really excited to be here. Thanks a lot. This topic, as Stephen said, is timely in terms of we're all working through it, and really excited to speak with everybody here today.
All right, thanks, Tom. So jumping in right now, just to set the context a little bit, obviously COVID has disrupted the industry, and as a result of that, it's ushered in an era of what we call everything virtual. And certainly for us here at Virtual Care is kind of what we wanted to focus on. The theme around digitization has accelerated. It was enabled obviously by necessity as everyone was remote during COVID. but also it was enabled by a pronounced shift in consumer behavior. Patients wanted to consume their healthcare probably the same way that they consume their food, which on their phone. And so MedTech has clearly played an important role in responding to the pandemic. So obviously for today, we wanted to focus our conversation on two parts. How did we respond to the pandemic? And what is the outlook on sustaining these trends beyond COVID? Some of the themes that we'll touch on as a result of our conversation, we'll talk about productivity across the product development space, focusing on organizational agility and our experience with that. How has virtualization of care manifested itself across the industry? The impact of remote culture, which I know has been pronounced for most companies around innovation and the overall workspace. Our experience with recruiting digital talent. We hear a lot about some of the needs around upskilling, training, and obviously attracting new talent to our team. We'll focus also on what are some of the new business models that were created and some of the partnerships that were created as a result of the pandemic, obviously because of necessity, but what did those look like beyond the pandemic? And then lastly, is sustaining innovation in a post-pandemic world something that is sustainable, which is really the impetus for us at PA, where we created the playbook that Rachel mentioned at the beginning. We did a survey across the industry, and we were interested in this topic largely because we wanted to see what innovation is going to look like in a post-pandemic world. So with that in mind, I think we're going to jump into the discussion. My first question is for Stephen. So Stephen, my question to you is, how has the pandemic impacted productivity for your organization? And how have you been able to sustain your pace of development?
Great, thanks, Mark. It's a great question. I think we all have heard that productivity actually has been demonstrated to have increased, which I think was a bit of a surprise. Maybe many of us thought it would be hampered. And I have to say that we have actually been able to maintain our productivity through development. I work in a global company, right, with global R&D. I'm generally working with Japan, US, and Europe, very much on common projects and development activities. And so I think we're somewhat used to that remote world. Many people, I think, do fall into that category. And really what I believe helped us maintain and actually accelerate our pace of development was the use of tools that we really already had and we're already using. And I'll give you some examples. Obviously the PDM software tools that exist today. We use a tool with one of our partners that helps us communicate effectively and exchange information effectively in a remote environment. We don't all have to be in the same place. Another example, I think we're all very familiar with Zoom. Here we are on it. That's become much more prevalent. I actually saw a statistic that said Zoom went from 10 million users a day in 2019 to currently 200 million users a day. We obviously just started using Zoom a whole lot more, right? And it's actually been a pretty effective tool. I think, we've been able to leverage that. And obviously there are many other types, Microsoft Teams, et cetera, that are very helpful in communication, in sharing information. So that's helped us maintain our productivity as well. And we did have to make some adapting to the, as we all realize with R&D, there's often a hands-on piece to it. You've got to get your hands-on, and I work in devices and equipment. So clearly it's something that we have to put our arms around, literally. We've been able to adapt our environments to be a safer environment. So social distancing and how we've structured our facilities and the teams to operate together, that was an adaptation that we had to make, and it's been very effective in allowing us to maintain our productivity. So I think the consulting, PA Consulting's research has also amplified that. Things like product development approaches like lean product development. We're a big proponent of that. We often use those types of tools, and I think we've just really accelerated the use of those. We've used them more and more as they've helped us maintain our momentum. And again, what I would say lastly too, that I think helped in productivity was really a focus on the challenges we all faced, right? I think we've all faced in the pandemic some significant challenges, from the way we work and our workflow to also the needs in the industry, right? The healthcare space has really stepped forward in all our minds. Obviously, we're all working in that industry already pretty much, but I think in everybody's mind. And what that did was it sort of created a common purpose, a focus on how we could solve these challenging problems we faced. And I guess, to me, when you've got really clear purpose and focus, what ends up happening is your productivity increases. You get excited about what you're doing. I know we all tend to work harder. I think actually the stats have said that the number of hours we're working are up, even though we're home more.
Yeah.
But I think part of that is because we're passionate about what we're doing. And at least in my environment, that's what I've experienced. So I think in general, we've definitely sustained our pace of development and actually even increased it.
Thanks, Steve. John, the next question is for you, and really that's focused more on how has the pandemic impacted your business and your ability to sell virtually.
Yeah, well, it was certainly, it was a very significant impact on the company, both I would say operationally and commercially. Like, how are we going to get our systems into the homes? Just briefly to give context then on what we do. We onboard patients really, great risk of an amputation, extensive comorbidities. We provide them a mat that goes in their home, and then we monitor that data and then have a nursing team that works with the patient to try to prevent the bad outcomes from occurring before they happen. So operationally though, right, like we used to deliver devices, get in the home, do home training. We had a number of things we did that, as we realized, first of all, this is like one of the most high risk patients we have in terms of their comorbidities, their lungs. We had to flip overnight to virtually. We were fortunate that prior to this, for purposes of scale, we had been experimenting with complete virtual onboarding and virtual operations. So we were fortunate when we pivoted, we had some experience doing this, but it was certainly, you had to kind of feel your way to do it right. And then commercially, at the time, our primary book of business, our call point was in the clinics, in the very high risk clinic, where we wanted to keep these patients out of there, where they could contract the virus. And of course, we didn't want to be there to make sure we were doing our best to limit the spread. So almost overnight, again, we had to switch on, how are we going to do virtual sales? And we had to figure out the right ways to do that. We were fortunate. We started a partnership with the VA. And through that partnership, I think we could probably talk a ton about, we were able to figure out how to solve this together. And how are we going to work and support sites? How are we going to make sure we identify patients without having them to come into the clinic? Again, I can spend a lot of time here, but through partnership, we were able to figure out not only how to address issues, but to make significant improvements towards scale and vamping up the business.
Thanks, John. And Tom, the next question for you is really around the impact of the pandemic on the culture and your ability to recruit. What has that been like?
Yeah, sure, Mark. I think it's a great question, because I think at the center of every one of the organizations that we're part of is the culture, and that culture, I think, whether positive, negative, it's been impacted. And not to say that we did it right all the way. I think we learned a lot, of the 16 months that we were out of the office, and we iterated and remained agile and kind of went through every, that kind of virtual happy hour to the, the virtual games that everybody would play, just to make sure that we're all still speaking to each other and, having that kind of human component. But I think honestly, the one thing that helped a lot was, and I think the pandemic even drove it to a certain point, was a true unified, clear message, not only about why we're doing something, because that's really relevant in healthcare and med tech, but how. How are we going to use the tools that you all have mentioned? How are we going to continue innovating, right? We were at a very interesting spot in our innovation curve prior to FDA submission, and we had to look at the other 15 to 20 people on the Zoom call and say, how are we going to make sure that we can really lock arms and get this to happen? How are we going to take our lab systems and take them from our engineering lab and put them in everybody's living rooms and still do verification? These were all really important messages to get across and to really kind of unify everybody and say, yeah, this is still possible. We can still make this happen. And not only that, we're going to make it happen. And in some cases, accelerate it, as we saw in your report, Mark. But I think that understanding of that message also enables the team members the latitude to work within their day.
Yeah.
I think this pandemic affected each one of us very differently, right? So everybody had their unique experience with the pandemic. Some lost loved ones. Some it didn't have as much of an impact as their day to day. Others were somewhere in between. And I think having that unified message, having and really giving that latitude to the team to say, work whatever, just work around kind of your day to day, your specific situation was really, really important, and enabled people to manage their life and what they had to do professionally. But I guess in terms of the recruiting aspect, maybe a little bit, with what I guess we'll call the virtualization or the digitization of our workday, right? We all were sitting on these Zoom calls. It really opened up geographic regions that we probably wouldn't have recruited from. Being a small company, we always try to recruit locally to make sure that we have the people that are around here, that maybe we don't have to invest in relocation expenses. Now this kind of geographic barrier has been reduced, right? We get to recruit from Silicon Valley, from here in Boston. We get to recruit from Austin and Seattle and the Southeast. All of these places have great hotspots in artificial intelligence and computer vision and incredible labs at all the universities. We've been able to utilize that and say, not only do we do a lot of interviews over Zoom, but some of their work days are purely virtual at this point, and it's actually worked quite well. We've trained ourselves to make it work. So I think all of this is really it's great to make sure that we encompass a good team that's worldwide, not just in the US, but still kind of solidifying there's still a portion of it that needs to be human interaction. And we've recognized that. So we make sure that we have quarterly, all hands. Everybody comes in, and we make sure that we still have that face-to-face interaction and do it safely. But that culture is super, super important for us to really continue to innovate and be successful.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. And I think on the culture specifically and the ability to recruit, I think that's obviously responding to the pandemic was one part of it, but I think now emerging out of the pandemic, I think that's going to sustain and continue. These are part of the trends that, as we speak to some of our medtech leaders in the industry, that they're seeing at this stage, and some of the challenges there is really around being able to train and then upskill their existing teams digitally. But also the other part is being able to attract talent, new talent, obviously to the organization or to your team to support with that innovation project and so forth. So my sense is that is going to be a theme that is going to obviously persist post pandemic, and it'll be with us for a little bit longer. So let's jump on to the second aspect of our discussion, and now looking obviously at beyond the pandemic. So how can we leverage this shift to accelerate innovation for the future? The first questions that I had is for Stephen. Stephen, you saw your teams innovate and really rally around critical needs during the pandemic. How do organizations instill that urgency for projects before they hit that point of criticality?
Great question. How do we keep this going? I think we've all experienced or seen this. I guess from my perspective, innovation is driven by need, right? And we had a tremendous need that we just went through, and maybe still going through. Kind of many new unmet needs, heightened clinical needs that maybe we were always there, but maybe became much more important. And so that need would drive innovation. So how do we capture that? How do we keep that going? How do we keep the focus on that need? I think we saw very many examples. I can give you a couple of companies, basically rearranging their manufacturing operations so that they could produce PPE, right? That was, hey, we can do this, right? And they did it very rapidly with dramatic changes. We all know about the ventilator programs and what came of those types of things, really tremendous examples. And so that need, how do we create that sense of urgency, going forward, right? And hopefully we don't have another pandemic that requires that. That I think it comes down to certain things. One, we have to focus on the big problems. We need to connect more with customers, patients, really amplify that so we can understand what those needs are. And we're looking ahead, we're forecasting ahead. A term we use in Fujifilm is called backcasting. So we look ahead at what, imagine the future and those problems that we'll face. And I think we can all think about those today, even though we've been through the pandemic. What do we know is going to happen? One, well, how do we continue to connect virtually in the healthcare environment, right? We all know that's going to continue. That's going to be there in the future. And there's going to be a need for that. How do we address the reluctance of patients getting clinical help, going to the clinic and getting services, right? We know that's going to be there. That's definitely, we can imagine that in the future. I think in general, we can imagine the level of stress, the level of burnout that many of us are going to experience, but certainly our healthcare workers. So we see all of these things that we imagine the future to look like. Let's start backcasting. What do we need to do today to address those types of problems and instill that, hey, this is the future we're going to be challenged with. How do we focus on that and create a sense of urgency? So I think those are the types of things from my perspective. And then the other part is sometimes I think we accepted the barriers that we all faced. And I know personally from a development perspective, those could be technical barriers, that could be regulatory barriers that we're all experienced with and understand, or maybe some business aspects or the market barriers. We overcame those barriers because of the tremendous need that existed. I think we all know stories of how things were, regulatory approvals went very quickly. We all know about that. We all know about how technical solutions came about through various partnerships, collaboration, really inventiveness of a lot of people, right, who were driven to it. We need to make sure that we continue that process of overcoming those barriers, sort of refusing to settle for what we've maybe previously in the past had to live with, and sort of said, well, that's just the FDA and we're just going to have to live with it. Well, maybe we don't, because we've actually now experienced the fact that we can overcome some of those barriers. So I think that's the piece is really addressing, looking forward to those needs, and then realizing that we can overcome a lot of the barriers and start working on doing that right now. So that's how I see us sustaining innovation and this pace going forward. Thanks.
Thanks, Steve. Maybe follow-on question to that. I think you obviously mentioned regulatory and do you see regulatory? It's obviously during COVID, regulatory was at an accelerated pace. But how do you see that in a post-pandemic? Is that do you see that as a barrier to innovation?
I think we're all going to always have to live with some level of regulatory approval wherever we are, and that's a changing environment, a changing landscape. I think we're all right now thinking about what does MDR in Europe look like, and as we experience all of that and trying to get new products introduced to Europe, it's something we're going to have to live with. But I guess what I look at is, regulatory is, again, maybe it's back to these partnerships, but our experience has been sort of engaging US FDA of what is it we need to be doing early, pre-submission discussions, various things like that I think are ways for us to reduce that barrier. And we know it's going to be there, but now we're starting collaborating through that. I think everybody on this, involved in the healthcare industry wants to introduce a safe and effective product to the market. Nobody's trying to bring something that isn't going to work, right? So thinking of it that way, collaborate, work together. What do we need to do? Because oftentimes that delay comes from a lack of communication and understanding. What is it we need to demonstrate to get the regulatory approval? Make sure we understand that and address that early in our programs.
Thanks, Steve. John, maybe I'll take the same question around regulatory also to you as well. Any particular thoughts that you'd want to weigh in on that?
Well, certainly, on that reimbursement side, how they're thinking about coding and coverage and to support telehealth. I think that they began to experiment pre-pandemic, and I think I'll be short on this one. It's just been exciting that they had already figured out how to implement a lot of those changes to help better support the virtual care explosion that was just around the corner. As far as FDA parts, I don't think we had much experience during the pandemic. We weren't putting anything through, but we saw a ton on the payment side. Yeah,
and Tom?
Yeah, we submitted and got our product cleared during the pandemic. So, we saw that our review team, they were very communicative all the way through. I mean, they weren't the team that were going through all the different vaccines and ventilators. It was a general surgery device. So that being said, they were as fast and as communicative as I've ever seen. And I think that goes with a heightened sense of awareness of really just how important these devices are. And I think we're seeing that in the world, is that everybody's saying, wow, this healthcare and medical device and med tech is really something to pay attention to. And FDA, I think they really stepped up. I think they did a great job.
Thanks, Tom. And so our next question is back to you, John, and that's really focusing on the business models that changed obviously during the pandemic, specifically for your organization, and specifically around remote care, which is obviously a theme that has certainly evolved or accelerated during the pandemic, but it seems at this stage that's going to continue. What is the role of data specifically that's played in your organization, but also your thoughts around what that's going to look like in enabling that future for remote care across the industry?
And I'll be mindful of time. I'll build to that, and I'll try to be, again, brief in the whole part. I think as far as what makes these things durable, I think culture was probably the most important part for us to set up that what the things we were doing now, why we believe that they're going to just continue. For us, it gave us like almost perfect clarity of purpose. Why are we here? Why are we doing this company? Why is it so in need? We could clarify what exactly are we going to do? How are we going to help? And then, with this, like just with a lot of the chaos going on outside of the world, it gave us the ability to relook at something that had been so sacred, our values, and what's most important. None of the changes and tweaks we had made had anything to do with the pandemic per se, but it gave us this ability to say, here's how we make good decisions. It allowed us to be a lot more virtual. We weren't in the office because here's what we expect. Here's the grid that we make our decisions through. And that was a key spot. Organizationally, of course, we had to adapt into a virtual model. As we started to really stack on nursing care support, we began hiring them in the local regions. They knew the local culture They knew they were in the right time zone. So it allowed us to start to tack on a lot of people. I think we over tripled in size, and yet we could do so completely virtually. It just allowed for this ability to do it. I think we just keep coming back to the vision, mission, values. That was the way we kept it very, very cohesive. And then lastly, we just saw this explosion of virtual care. Our system is bringing in data, so now you can monitor a whole population simultaneously, passively, right? It's just as important to know what data you don't have to, or what patient you don't have to work with, than the patient that urgently needs our care. And it basically allowed us to turn, for especially these complex patients, it allowed us to move away from this one-to-one model, one doc to one patient, where they're right in front of you, to a one-to-many platform. So they can actually be dealing with a population simultaneously, instead of just who's in my book today, who's coming into the clinic today. I think that's probably the biggest thing that data allowed us to do, where we had the opportunity, all the changes we talk about in regulatory, and finally these companies, our company was ready to drop in and take advantage of all the learnings we had. For us, we've been up for a decade. It was just a well-timed change to the ecosystem.
That's great. Yeah, and obviously data plays a significant role in a post-pandemic world. We're collecting obviously a lot more data now with digitization across the industry. I think the industry in general is actually starting to come together to get a better sense for how to use that data for either competitive edge or otherwise. And with that, I think, Tom, coming to you with the next question. So partnerships is obviously a theme that we saw pretty clearly across the industry. I think we saw competitors kind of partner together to help obviously deliver and support the pandemic. So for your organization, can you speak a little bit about some of the different partnerships that you were able to establish? Some of them obviously non-traditional.
Yeah, sure, Mark. So I think we look at partnerships from so many different points of view. Within, during COVID, we saw national sports teams, trucking in and flying in ventilators to places on site, and within Active, we look at it the same way. We look at it, there's development partnerships, there's supply chain partnerships, and we leveraged them quite a bit during the pandemic, and actually kicked off quite a few new ones. On the development side, as John was talking about, in terms of kind of collection of data, we've seen this eye toward healthcare really really start to pick up some steam and put some fire behind it. The amount of data that we can collect, where does it go? We've been able to kick off partnerships with Microsoft for storage and collection and moving data around, where to put it. And they see that as a great way to use their already engineered platforms to really affect the world. We've seen that the pandemic has shown that how just far stretching healthcare can really impact, and these partnerships, with broad tech organizations, they see the same thing, and they're looking for kind of entry points into the market to say, hey, we want to get involved too, we want to help. How do we do that? And companies that are kind of in our industry, we're there with open arms saying, yeah, come help us, right? You all know how to do this really well, so come on board and let's make this happen. We've also partnered up with Qualcomm in terms of moving data around in the whole 5G revolution. At the same time, we have to move terabytes of information, not only in kind of standard data and logs, but also video. Qualcomm's there to say, hey, we want part of this too. Help, we think we have a solution for that. Let us help you out, and we're doing that. And finally, even I think it's public here that NVIDIA has helped, and we have a partnership with NVIDIA and looking at all of the AI and computer vision. I mean, they're leaders in the tech industry for computer vision and AI and the compute behind it. So we brought them on and said, hey, look, you all as an organization, you all are incredible. So come on board, and we'll bring some of the clinical benefit, the clinical know-how within med device and the regulatory environment, and we'll work together to get this moving. It's been great, but that's just on the development side. Stephen Flint put here in the chat, what about supply chain?
Yeah. We
experienced the same thing, but honestly, we not only did we kick off partnerships for supply chain to kind of augment getting things a little bit sooner, or maybe using some purchasing power across different organizations, but having those large tech partnerships, they've given us more insight to a supply chain that we wouldn't have had. So we knew, well ahead that that there were going to be GPU shortages, because they said, hey, we're seeing this across some of our customer base. Is this something that you all want to look at? And so we were able to pre-order as we saw that GPU shortage coming, and we were able to kind of step aside and not really encounter that massive shortage that the world is seeing in GPUs. So I think partnerships don't always have to be, hey, let's solve something this second right now, but it's more strategic, more looking out. How are we going to set something up for in 6 months that this is really going to impact our business? And and it's just across so many facets. So it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, absolutely, Tom. Stephen, actually, maybe the same question to you for a weigh-in for Fujifilm. Could you speak about maybe some of the impact of partnerships that partnerships have had on your organization?
Yeah, it's a really good point. I think partnerships have been really critical for innovation. Of course, as Tom had mentioned, on the development side, as well as on the market access, right? As we bring new products or technologies to the market, sort of thinking out of our silo of, sort of here's our channel, our distribution chain, maybe our customer, and work with others to say maybe that technology benefits a broader audience, but we don't necessarily have access to it. And so I think those are the types of things that we're going to see more of. Certainly, we've been involved in a number of those types of relationships. One of the things that I think what came of the pandemic, which I think we'll see more of, and as Tom had highlighted, is larger companies are certainly more willing to collaborate and work together.
Yeah.
I mean, historically, we've all sort of going alone, right? We're a big company, we can handle this, right? And maybe that if we work together, we can go a lot farther. They say the old saying, you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
Yeah.
I think that really applies today. So I'm encouraged that there's definitely a lot more openness around partnerships across the industry with all different types of players. And, certainly Tom has highlighted some of those. So excited about it.
Yeah, and that's been the trend that we're seeing across the industry. Is there's obviously more willingness to partner, and partnerships can be in various facets. Obviously, on the innovation side, looking at what is for medtech leaders, looking at their capabilities and what is their core competency that they're actually good at, and getting a sense or strategically getting a sense for what are some of the partnerships that they can actually strike to help them accelerate their level or their pace of development. I think these are some of the key things that we are seeing across the industry, and it's actually quite helpful, and it's a lot of fun to see. I think with that, we're coming to the end of our panel discussion. Rachel, I think we wanted to open that up for questions. I know there's a number of questions that I'm seeing come through the feed.
Oh yes, there's questions. So yeah, I will help moderate those. Excellent discussion so far, guys. Very well done. So I'm just taking a look at some of the Q&A. We'll try to get through all of them, but feel free to pop more of them in. One of the ones I actually wanted to start with was around the productivity topic that we've been talking about. Obviously, so the comment / question, if you guys can see it on your screen, is, a lot of the spike in productivity came as a result of obviously a sense of urgency, but also because social activities were not happening, right? No one was going out, weekends were free. This isn't the case long term. and it's not healthy. So how can employees inject a sense of reality back into their employers' long-term expectations now that life is starting to open back up a bit? Anyone can take that one.
Stephen, do you want to start? And
Sure. Yeah. No, that's really, we hear a lot about burnout, right? And productivity's increased, but also the stress level. We're all dealing with new ways of working, et cetera. I think Tom mentioned a bit about culture. I think that's going to be really critical. We're going to establish some new cultures of how we work together, how companies work, how people work together, and socialize together too. That might be a part of it. And I think that's going to be an area that's going to require a lot of focus from employers, right? As to what is it that's going to work for my employees. And obviously some people are going to get it right, some aren't. But I think what's most important is the maintaining that sense of agility. We're going to have to adapt. And so I know within our company, there's a lot of discussion around various hybrid models that we want to try out and start. And what's going to be important is adapting those. Obviously, things may change in the future, like what we've experienced the past 18 months has been a huge change for us all. But ultimately, those little things that are going to start to address, hey, this is working, this isn't working, getting that feedback from the employees and the employers, being adaptive to that and making changes. So I foresee that's going to be critical, that culture and adapting to the new environments that we all are faced with.
yeah, and just to weigh on that, I think with the theme that we spoke to just a tad bit earlier about the shortages that we're seeing in the industry across digital talent, I think for a lot of companies and leaders that are actually working through that, it's important to, as Steve mentioned, get a sense and get feedback from your team to what is working, what is not working, and being able to work through that. I think that's really critical.
I think for us too, certainly we see an increase in productivity, but at times when we're at home, we have to take care of our families. In some ways, the pandemic decreased. It was just something we had to figure out how to do right. And I think the part that's going to be durable here is the idea of I've always said the phrase like work-life balance, where you're trying to figure this. I think it's lifestyle design. Every employee can now really figure out what works best for them. Well, it can be flexible now. We have a way to communicate in the right way. I think this really allowed the employee to take more control of how they wanted to build their life. And I think as long as we continue to embrace that, we get the advantage of that, that purposefulness of that. And I think we get, probably a happier workforce well out of the pandemic as a result.
Yeah, and just maybe one more kind of dot on that is, so I think clarity and transparency is key, both from the organization and to the employees. Be able to set expectations as to say, hey, look, my kid's school went remote, and now I got to deal with that, right? I got to do remote schooling, 6 hours a day. But that transparency is so important, not only from the organization to the team, but also from the team to the organization, because it enables organizations to plan. And I think that's really, really important. But also, I think for us as kind of leaders within the organizations, it's really important to focus on personal development. One of the things that it's really hard to do, we can all be super productive, and because maybe there's more hours in the day that we can focus, that can happen. But I think we also have to make sure that the employees, the team members, are also increasing in their career. We don't want to look back in 5 or 10 years and say, that space was just because of COVID. So these people didn't develop onto the next level of their career. So it's something that we all have to really remain focused on and make sure that we incorporate that into the day-to-day also.
I think the one thing I would add to that as well, if you don't mind me chiming in, is I think there's a real opportunity, right? COVID has been hard on women, right? Especially working at home. But I think there's actually an opportunity because a lot of men who, and I'm generalizing, this is not fair at all, but traditionally, most men have not had to experience a lot of the day-to-day child raising. I'm happy to say that I think that is changing and that is not the typical or the norm. but now guys have had to be at home and understand what working with toddlers is like, and understanding what it is to try to do those things. Whereas I think women in the past have had to maybe feel a little uncomfortable telling their boss, Tom, exactly like what you're saying, being transparent with what they have to do. It wasn't, well, I have kids, I have to go do this. It was maybe they'd come up with a different excuse because they couldn't feel that comfort of being transparent. I think that the COVID has broken down a lot of those barriers, right? Just being in people's homes, seeing what's going on around them. So hopefully this is a really great opportunity to kind of level set and equalize on some of those things and say, you know what, we all went through the same thing at the exact same time. Let's remember that as we develop relationships and move forward. So that's just my 2 cents on that one before we move on to the next question. So let's see. Were any of you affected by the clinical trial suspension? Was anyone in the middle of trying to do a trial when things kind of all shut down, and how did you manage that?
Yeah, actually, Rachel, we were doing non-significant risk IRB trials in settings. And so, yeah, there were a number of hospitals that we were looking at, and they just kind of put a hard stop on those procedures. And we took it and said, you know what? Hey, look, this is exactly what Stephen and John have been saying. Is we got to be agile here. Let's take this as an opportunity to say, well, we obviously had learnings, so let's go back, let's iterate, let's update the software. And so the next time we go back, instead of doing it maybe in 3 more months, let's do it now, so that when we go back, we're learning on the next revision of software. So yes, absolutely. And you just we tried to take advantage of it at every curve.
Yeah, I could add to that too. And Tom, it's a good point, is how do we take advantage of when we get a window of time, what can we pull forward to address that, keeping the programs on track. I think a couple of things that I thought, and one that we experienced particularly was around developing some alternative clinical models, animal models that we could use to basically present the data to the regulatory bodies to kind of show. And I know that's not always an option, but it's certainly something to consider and look at as to we can use that. And again, collaborating with the regulatory bodies on how we were going to do it was really beneficial, right? So we were able to do some animal models and some animal labs, getting clinicians input, getting the regulatory body input that actually allowed us to use that and again, address that problem. So being agile and looking at what alternatives do we have, considering we're going to be delayed with running some of the clinical cases.
I think for us, it just real and brief, it moved us more towards pragmatic trial design. Let's see how it works in real life. Let's get away from case reports. Let's get rid of, a lot of the things that you would need to be so in person with. We just moved away from it. And then we started using EMRs and administrative data then as our outcomes data set. Well, how are we doing on all-cause hospitalization, ER visit, like the key metrics? We could pull that from that database. And I think it had a big impact on trial design that for us, I don't think we're going to go back. I think this is the way to go.
So I know none of us are omniscient, but so when I ask a question, are we at the beginning of this, or are we at the middle of this, or are we at the end of this? Where are we at on this curve? I'm not going to expect you to know the answer. What I would ask is, how are you preparing your teams, right? As you look forward, what's the message there?
Ian, you want to go first?
I guess probably one of the things that in particular, and there's a lot I think that we need to do and can do, but one of the areas that we're really focused on is sort of a little deeper dive with our customers and patients, really understanding the problems and the opportunities that exist. That's kind of been our focus. Again, as we talked earlier about creating that sense of urgency and really kind of enabling and engaging our teams to really make an impact in the clinical setting. That's kind of where we've kind of focused and what we're trying to instill in our team. So there's a lot of collaboration between R&D and the product management and marketing teams to really dig into what we think are some key problems that we can be focused on solving. So that's one example of something we're doing, I think, as we go forward. And hopefully that answered some of that question. But.
And I just to step in for a sec too, I think on back of what Stephen was saying, I think Mark actually addressed it earlier too. I think this is a continuum, and we're changing the way industry is, development is done and go-to-market strategies are taken on. We've kind of looked at our go-to-market strategy for the next 3 to 5 years and said, how does a pandemic, whether it's this or whether it's a cybersecurity threshold or something like that, actually how do we address that in our go-to-market planning? And our go-to-market planning is, we're doing a lot of remote sessions now, where we'd be having kind of feet on the street in the hospitals. We're doing a lot remote, and that enables kind of that top of the funnel to be a little bit broader. But it's a whole different strategy. It's a different way to get user and customer engagement, winning the hearts and minds of the different kind of stakeholders. But yeah, I think to say that we're beginning, middle, or end, this is a continuum, and it's changed the way we do business. So we have to adjust.
Yeah.
I think. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, John.
I think for us, my personal opinion is I don't think the pandemic is ever going to go away. I think this is just the new reality. So for us, how it's disproportionately affecting minority populations. It's disproportionately affecting our most vulnerable patients that may have limited access to care. So for us, it's no greater time than to be doing, to get people on their own 2 feet, to be independent, no more amputations, and to keep them healthy in the home, be independent, taking care of themselves out of the healthcare system. So if anything, to me, it's just, again, clarity of why are we here? What do we need to do? Now more than ever, our work is critical.
Yeah, Rachel, I think what I'll say here is we tend to, we tend to underestimate crises. Well, we tend to underestimate crises and overestimate trends. But my sense here is that this trend is here to persist. I think trying to time when that's going to change. I think this is the new reality, both for the ability to be remote and enabling our teams to be remote. I think that this is important, but also, for example, digitization, that's here to stay. If organizations have gaps or development teams have gaps, for example, around cybersecurity, guess what? That's going to persist, and that's something that you'll have to either learn how to get better at it, or just figure out how to partner and really support that going forward. So a lot of these trends that we're seeing right now, I think leaders should plan that these are going to persist and be with us for a while. I think the sense around productivity and how better we've gotten around productivity, I think that's something to really build into our planning and get better at it.
Okay, I think we've got time for one more question, and this one, I'm interested to hear your perspective on it. The question is around purchasing behavior, and other than COVID-related therapies, have hospitals, healthcare providers been accepting of new technologies, or are they playing a bit safe? My perspective, if we get started, is not so much that they've accepted new therapies during this time, rather they have been open to things that were already kind of in progress or on the market. They're just now getting paid for them. But my thought is, moving forward, this is actually the time for new therapies and new technology, right? Because during the pandemic, we saw that so many things were out of date in hospital and in healthcare. There were so many things that could be done better, but there were blocks in place. So I would be curious to get your perspective on that as well. It seems like the next couple of years it could be the really radical time for med device development versus what just happened in the last 18 months.
Yeah, I'll go ahead, John.
As a doctor, look, we're tough sometimes, right? We never let progress get in the way of tradition. That was what we really learned at all. The hospitals are remain silent on. So it's tough. I think we were forced to change here for the better. I think a lot of things changed that were significantly better care, but it's hard to do. I think we're starting to see our first data come back on its efficacy. I think the data is coming out amazing. So my hope is that, I think you're right. I think we're starting to see the changes in behavior, but it's probably the next 4 or 5 years where real market adoption is starting to flip to these more sort of virtual mechanisms of care.
I guess I could add from my perspective, and I spoke again about the need, but I think if the innovations and the development address those needs, there'll be even more acceptance to change. I think we went through that, and a lot of the healthcare industry had to accept change because the need was so great. If we continue to focus on those needs, those upcoming needs that are really making an impact, both from the clinician as well as from the healthcare industry, right? We all know they're financially challenged. There's a lot of pressure on the healthcare entities to manage that. If we continue to focus on addressing those needs, I do believe innovations are going to accelerate. They're going to need that. They're going to want it, and they're going to make the investments in it. Things that are at the periphery of this would be nice to have, or it might be a little better than what I have today, I think those will be a harder struggle because the funds are going to be, and the attention is going to be focused on those things that are going to make an impact, especially with regard to the challenges we're facing today.
Yeah, so Stephen, I definitely agree with that. I mean, financially, you always have to make a business case there that there's your device needs to not only be efficacious and safe to use, but there has to be solve the business need there. One of the things that we look at is, we've all seen how important it is to have ER and ICU beds open and available. So how do we make sure that the standard surgeries that are happening every day end at when they should, and that they don't result in a readmission that takes up an ER and ICU bed. So that's some of the things that we focus on a lot, is how do we make sure that the patient's continuum of care goes as it should and stays on track, and how do we really prevent that patient from having to come back and occupy. So but it's all a different mindset is how it's come across.
Yeah, and I agree. I think, Rachel, you said something that we're seeing tremendous amount of innovation right now across the industry. I think I completely agree. I think we're probably healthcare in general is going to see some of the most phenomenal innovations. I think that over the next few years. A lot of it has come across today because of necessity, but I think as the industry emerges out of this COVID phase, I think the trend is certainly going to continue. I think we're seeing a lot of investment in medtech at this stage. Anything that has a digital or remote aspect to it is certainly something that's attracting a lot of capital, and certainly is going to continue to exhibit a tremendous amount of innovation in the future. I think for a lot of us leaders in this space, as we look at our product portfolio, we should look at those with an eye towards what our patients need and how does digital really enable that. And I think that trend is strong, is certainly going to continue.
Yeah, that's great. We're actually right up on time. We got through all the questions, except one where I think I'm going to make it more of a comment than the question. It's, MedTech is having a moment right now. MedTech has been top of mind. MedTech came through. MedTech has helped in a number of healthcare workers. There were a number of opportunities, and I think the MedTech community, as we've talked about, has really risen and done a lot of important things. So it's on us to keep it going in that direction, right? To take the leverage and the goodwill that has come out of, the last 18 months of doing the awesome things and coming in as an industry and stepping up. But I think it's on all of us to keep that going and to keep MedTech top of mind for folks and make sure that innovation just keeps driving forward. So thank you, Tom, John, Steve, Mark. This was a fantastic panel. And thank you to everyone for hanging out with us for an hour. I hope you got as much out of it as I did. And one last thanks to PA Consulting for helping us put all this together. So everyone, have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks, Rachel. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Bye.